Good afternoon. My name is Kirsty Seeloff, and I am the Director of Government Relations for Traverse Connect and the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance. Thank you for joining our remote worker session. First and foremost, we would like to once again thank our presenting sponsor, Consumers Energy, for your continued support of the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance and for sponsoring this event today. Today we have the honor of having Lance Robbins, Director of Economic and Workforce Development with Distribute Consulting, joining us to speak on the remote workforce. Throughout his presentation today, Lance will be discussing a comprehensive community-driven ecosystem building approach as a necessary investment in leveraging long-term tourism and relocation of remote workers as an economic development strategy. While municipal marketing efforts are newsworthy and incentive-based programs have had success, prioritizing the infrastructure and community pieces will be critical to the sustained success of any talent or business attraction campaign. Starting with the resources and the employees in your community lays the groundwork and foundation for continued growth and success. I'd now like to take a moment just to tell you a little bit about Lance. Lance has more than 10 years of operational leadership focused on workforce scaling, growth, and management, and has been featured in Harvard Business Review and Forbes. Lance has also served as a talent acquisition contractor and advisor to remote tech organizations such as Automatic, 10up, and XWP. He has extensive experience working with government organizations. Lance believes that creating virtual work opportunities is the catalyst to realizing its power for positive change in rural America. Lance, welcome and thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you all for joining. It's my pleasure to be here, and I have the opportunity to talk about something that I care a lot about, which has made a big impact for me in my life and my career. And I'm excited to share with you just what that all means and the experience, the ride that all of us have been on around the world as a global community over the past year has been absolutely unforgettable. And the change that it has brought to the landscape of economic development, of remote work, of talent migration, of all sorts of categories, is we're just trying to catch up with it. And so today we're going to take a bit of a dive into how remote work is playing into the economy, especially in places like rural northern Michigan and other parts of the country that have a similar makeup. So we're just going to move right in here. As Christy mentioned, my name is Lance Robbins. I'm from Distribute Consulting, and we are the world's only consulting firm that focuses exclusively on remote work and virtual operations. And a lot of what we do involves change management, helping organizations figure out how they're going to be successful by adopting this type of approach to their workforce. We do a lot of research and strategy planning, especially in the corporate world and in the public sector. And then as Christy mentioned as well, you can find us in publications like Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Boston Globe, BBC, and the list goes on. So the conversation here around remote work, it is just absolutely blasted off. It's taken off in a big way. And since COVID-19 broke out, things have changed dramatically. And so what we want to talk about, what we want to focus on and try to understand is how can remote work now be a force for economic development? So there's some keys that we need to understand as we start to explore this topic, and some of these changes and some of what's already been taking place fall into these categories. So the first would be that remote work accessibility. Is remote work a thing that people are able to do? How has that changed in the past year? Talent migration. Where are the hot spots? Where are the places that people want to be? What are the profiles of places that people want to be? And how has that changed over the past year? And what are the incentive programs that we hear about in the news? What are they doing? Are they successful? Are they relevant today? Has that changed? What adjustments should places that want to attract a new group of talent, what takeaways are there from the existing programs and what's changed. And then thinking about a sustainable community of remote work and an influx of new talent. How do you attract and keep those that you want to join your community? So first part, remote accessibility. What's happened? What's changed? So what we knew before COVID was that 45%, more than 20 million US full-time workers were able to, with their job description, their role responsibilities, work remotely 100% of the time. This is based on a study by Chicago Booth University that was released early 2020. And they looked at state by state, community by community, and the national average was around 45%. The interest for remote work is as strong as ever. 82% of the US workforce wants to work remotely at least part of the time. So we can see that people can and that they want to, but before the pandemic, only 8% of the US workforce worked from home. So February 22 and backwards, this was the number that we looked at as, who's working from home now in a substantial way, only 8%. So those that were do not match the level of those that would like to and those that could. And so what changed is that now we estimate 35% of the US workforce was working from home during the COVID-19 pandemic, especially spring of 2020 when lockdowns were in full force. And our projections are that going forward, 25 to 30% of the US workforce are going to continue to work remotely at least half the time as large employers, enterprise type organizations transition back to a long-term plan. It doesn't look the same as it did before. We hear this phrase new normal. Things have changed, and many employers are going to be going back to the office, but in a much more flexible, in terms of scheduling and location sort of way. Talent migration. Where are the increasing numbers of location-independent workers choosing to live? Because in the past, we chose to live where work was, so maybe not so much of a choice. But now, where work isn't tied to a physical location for many, like I said, 25, 30% of the workforce, where are they going? Where do they want to be? So there's a term in the housing real estate market that we're calling Zoom towns. Instead of boom towns, we're seeing places, particularly in rural areas, where the median price of homes has increased by 11.3%. So what's traditionally been a low-cost housing, very affordable to buy a home and property, those prices are outpacing their urban and suburban market counterparts. The prices are going up faster than any other places in America. And so it's showing that there's a push towards a less urban environment. And the other area that is seeing a lot of action are what we would call vacation communities. So they're smaller communities. Generally, we go there for a few weeks out of the year, a few days out of the year, but we can't live there because our work is somewhere else. But now that you can take work with you, people are saying, I want to live where I always wish I could be. And those are in these small vacation destination communities. So things like Hilton Head Island, which has got the warm weather and the beach, or the Poconos in New York, where there's beautiful hiking trails and skiing. A number of communities like this have seen a 30% increase in their housing sales over the past year. So this is sort of the profile of the top choice for location for the migrant flexible workforce. New York was hit the hardest by COVID-19, and we saw a big exodus from New York City. And I wanted to know, where are people going? And the Postal Service was tracking where these mail forwarding, long-term mail forwarding requests were being filed for. And the New York Times created this infographic to translate the data in a way that you and I can absorb it. And you can see that New York City lost a lot of its residents, some to other tier 1 cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, Miami, but many to smaller cities, tier 2 or below, Nashville, Atlanta, Charlotte, Portland, Maine, Austin, Texas, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Cleveland. And there's even some of these arrows, if you look a little closer, they're landing in destinations that don't even have a city attached to them. Several into upstate New York, some into what appears to be rural Ohio, western Pennsylvania. So there's been a trend out of New York, out of the major city. New York is among the fastest shrinking states, according to the 2020 data provided by the IRS. It's number 2, only second to West Virginia. And California is not a top 10 growth state either. So even though we see some of these arrows going into places like Los Angeles and San Francisco, if we could take the same type of information and turn it into a graphic, we'd see a lot of exodus from Silicon Valley into Nevada, into Idaho, into Oregon. There's a lot of transition out of that Bay Area. So the top interests, these are the things that people are after. And they're leaving the places they've had to be to places that they can choose to be to pursue. One is activity. These aren't in order of importance. They're all important. And to each individual, there's a different an interest. So activities, things like skiing, mountain biking, the beach, community. Where is my family? Where do my friends live? Where do I feel like I fit in? Many people go to the large city in pursuit of career, and they leave behind their community. So people are returning to their roots. And of course, cost is a huge consideration as well. San Francisco, New York, Toronto, Miami, all very, very expensive cities to live in. And many people are finding a much more affordable lifestyle and a higher level of living at a reduced cost by moving out of the large cities. And there's incentive programs. We talked about incentive programs just a little bit at the beginning. There are a number of these that have been launched as talent attraction programs. And my suggestion is that with the increased amount of flexibility, financial monetary incentives aren't going to be the primary driver for relocating talent. And so, while we mentioned that they're newsworthy, they're fun. People like to talk about them. They're exciting. They feel innovative. It's going to take more than throwing money at high-paid remote workers now to bring them to your community. Here's a look at how some of these have been successful and what they've done. Let's talk about a couple of these. Tulsa, Oklahoma is not a rural community, but it's certainly not a coastal community either with a large, urban sprawl. It's sort of one of these Midwest towns, 400,000 people, so it is a large community. But they, with the George Kaiser Family Foundation, they've created a program through the organization called Tulsa Remote that offered $10,000 for an applicant to relocate to Tulsa, Oklahoma for 1 year. And Tulsa did a great job at attracting applicants. $10,000 is a significant amount of money for people, but they also put a lot of effort into building community, building amenities, building an experience for people that will come and that they'll want to stay. Savannah, Georgia is another community that's offered financial incentives, this time in the form of a relocation reimbursement. So Savannah is offering $2,000 for those who relocate and sign a 1-year lease or purchase a home. And I think they have 50 of these grants available. And then Vermont is another similar campaign. But a lot of these are focused on, in the news, we hear about mostly money for remote workers to come to a place. And although if we look deeper, that's not the extent of it, that's the primary focus. And I would again suggest that if a financial incentive program is the primary focus of talent attraction, it's going to fall short. People have a choice now more than they ever did before. And they're looking for things that are more important than money. Which brings us to community and sustainability. What are the characteristics of enduring economic development programs? What is it that is going to make that lasting impact? I was reading an article just yesterday about creating affordable housing, and the author said, what does it matter if everyone comes to live here if we don't have a sense of community? So what is cheap housing if there's no community around it? And I thought that was really interesting and applicable to this conversation. So let's look at a couple of programs that have built, they've really learned from what people want, and they've built programs that are really enduring. So the first one is Las Palmas in the Canary Islands in Spain. They have done a tremendous job of building a community of remote workers, and people are moving there to live there. In fact, I was talking to a colleague today who in the last 6 months relocated from his home in Romania to the Canary Islands, and he and his family, they absolutely love it there. They've built co-working and co-living spaces. So this is, it's not like a hotel, but this is where someone who's going to stay for a long term, maybe 6 months, maybe a year. So it's not the short-term tourists that they're catering to. These are the long-term tourists, what you might call a digital nomad. But they're creating spaces for them to live and to work and also have social interaction, because a big part of the remote work experience is travel for many, but then it can also be very isolating, especially if you're traveling alone. And so a co-work and a co-living space where people feel automatically plugged into the local community, the local city. Annually, they host one of the largest remote work focused conferences in the world called RePeople. I think it's a tremendous way to bring attention to a city or a town that wants to attract new remote workers, and they do a very good job with it. I really recommend attending that if you have any interest in this topic. They've also got a lot of activities going on around them. Some things you can control and some things you can't control. Their mild tropical climate and proximity to the sandy beaches, are things that they're fortunate to have. But they've also been quite intentional about building a rich culture and putting out a very welcoming smaller town vibe in Las Palmas. Also the costs. So the accessibility from Europe and the US is not a huge barrier. And the cost of living compared to mainland communities, especially the larger urban areas in Europe and the US, it's significantly less. So if you're looking at your own community that you're representing here at this conference today, and you think, hey, we have a lot of those things going for us, a further look at the work in Canary Islands could be a big benefit to you. Another closer to home, this is the Rural Online Initiative. This is a program that our firm has been involved with the state of Utah and helping design and launch. Utah is one of the top 5 fastest growing states in the US. It made that list for 2020. People are going to Utah. There's a lot of opportunity there, a lot of rural opportunity, good connectivity. But in 2018, they introduced a bill into the state house, bill number 327, and it was designed to incentivize employers to engage with remote workers in Utah and to outfit rural Utahns to join a virtual workforce. And so they created a workforce training program, which our firm helped to design. And graduates of the program have reported, on average, a 21% increase in salary. So you can imagine Utah residents in rural counties, adding 20% to their income, and then circulating that around in their community makes a significant impact on these small towns. And 2 out of the 3 counties that participated, 10 out of 15 counties, so 2/3 of counties that participated in this program experienced reduced unemployment rates during the first year of the program. So putting together the community piece, the remote piece, and the economy piece, here's a few thoughts. That a great place to start, even though it may be more exciting to start with attracting new talent from outside, a great place to start is with the standing local workforce that exists in your community today. And that's an essential part to building a sense of community around your town, around your county, because there are a number of people that could be employed. Jumping over to the third point here, increased employability. There are many who are maybe non-traditional employees, whether that's a physical handicap or they're a primary caregiver, that because of remote work can join the workforce and otherwise have been dependent on either underemployment or unemployment benefits. And also noting, as we mentioned above with Utah, remote salaries. So 2 out of 3 employees that work remotely earn $75,000 or more per year. And so remote workers generally are in the high paid category. And if you think about the benefits of transitioning your local underemployed residents into a remote work vocation, there's a big opportunity for significant increased income into the community. And so we also look at employers, creating some sort of virtual chamber of commerce, building in-state networks of employers. There's obvious tax benefits between a Michigan employer hiring a Michigan employee, and that was a big part of the design of the program for Utah. Salt Lake City-based tech companies hiring remote workers from rural Utah counties. So who are the employers? Who are the big companies within the state that could hire now regional workers? If being in office 1-2 days a week is going to be the norm going forward, which it will be for many firms, that means the radius which they can reach out to attract talent for their company is a lot bigger than it used to be. And it might mean that some of those people who are going to take those new, at least part-time virtual jobs may live in your community as well. And how do you prepare employers? How does the state look at making sure that employers have the resources they need? Are there change management resources that need to be made available so that managers who are now going to be handling remote employees know how to do that successfully? So guiding those employers to be able to employ virtual team members is an important part of this program as well. And again, what are the existing resources that you have on hand? It has been said that an estimated of 50 to 60% of commercial retail space is going to be abandoned or no longer used for retail by the end of 2021. So what does that mean? And as I mentioned, I was reading the article about affordable housing. Many are converting shopping malls into whether it's short-term or long-term housing opportunities. What are the resources, the amenities, the facilities that are needed to support a growing community of virtual workers, and how can you leverage existing resources to provide those? And also, like we said above, the local under or unemployed workers are a resource. Upskilling them, helping them prepare for entering the virtual marketplace in a successful way is a big resource for your communities. And educational facilities, like I just mentioned, the upskilling, where are people going to consume the training, whether it's change management leadership training or individual worker training, to participate more fully in a more remote focused economic model in your community. Okay, so the more interesting, more exciting part of the discussion is around marketing campaigns. So when do we implement these aggressive municipal marketing campaigns? Whether they're incentivized monetarily or not, where do they come into play? And so I've drafted a bit of a timeline for us here to talk about this. So the first thing to do, and there's a concurrent session going right now. So if you're here with me, you couldn't be there if you wanted to, but please do watch the recording where John Roberts is talking about building physical infrastructure to support the communication and connectivity needs of a growing digital community. This is the backbone. This is the starting place. All the other exciting strategies and marketing campaigns, talent attraction ideas will be unsuccessful, will fall short if there's not reliable, high-speed connectivity for workers that are coming to your area. That is the absolute beginning point. So that's point number one on the timeline. And point number two is to engage the local workforce. How many people do you have in your community that are looking for work, that could work? Especially now with a more flexible model available, more accessibility to remote work, they could enter the workforce. And what can you do to give them a competitive advantage to join that virtual workforce and immediately start bringing dollars into the community? Secondly, recruiting that employer network. Who are the business owners? Who are the employers that could convert their current physical jobs to virtual jobs and engage with potential employees in your community? And what resources do they need? What coaching, what consulting, what training do they need to make that successful? Then also, shortly after, we need to think about, how do we support this growing community? What are the resources? What are the amenities? Are there any recreation amenities in your community? Do we need to designate bicycle lanes? Do we need to build trails? What are the attractions that this community is going to need to have to move on to the next phase? What about things like childcare for those who are working remotely from home and trying to share that space with children? This has been a real struggle for many, many people. And as we move out of confined to our homes situations, what are we going to have to offer to support digital workers? Whether that is a place for childcare or that's a place for co-working, a space where people can have an office that's not in their home, but it's also not an hour's drive away. Sort of hub and spoke type places to come together and to work. Think about those amenities that need to be built to support this growing community. And then when you have those things in place, starting from the beginning, then you can launch an aggressive marketing campaign. You can introduce new talent into this growing ecosystem where they have things built around them that are already fostering community, and they won't just be visiting for a few weeks. They're going to be electing to stay and contribute in an ongoing way to the economic growth of your county, your town, and your state. That brings me to the end of my presentation, and I intentionally wanted to save some time to talk to you and have questions. So.
Great. Thank you, Lance. Well, this is obviously a really important topic of conversation in Northern Michigan right now that has only been, increased in interest with COVID. So thank you for this information today. We have a couple questions coming through. The first one is, what role does having enough housing and reasonable housing and affordable housing have on deterring people to move to a community?
Great question. This is a big one. Because there are people in communities that are not, coming in from outside that are already struggling with housing. So that's what I was referring to when I was saying we need to look at the existing resources. What's being underutilized? What can be converted? Because housing is going to become an issue as more and more people are leaving the big urban centers and being attracted to rural communities. I'm making the assumption that a lot of you listening today aren't representing large urban centers. And so how is your community going to respond to that? So yes, housing is going to be an issue, and communities need to get creative in thinking about ways that existing resources can be repurposed to accommodate whether those are long-term tourists or they're the digital nomad that are coming to stay for a while, or they're families that are moving back to their roots, or whatever the case, we do need to be thinking about housing. Absolutely.
Thank you. Next question, are remote working centers critical for attracting workers, or are they content to work from their homes?
This is another really good question. So a lot of times, we talk about work from home. It's kind of been forced that way because we don't really have another option. But the home office, that's a bit of an assumption that people have the luxury of having a home office. I'm fortunate in my home that I have a room that nobody else needs to be in. But I have 3 kids, and if that wasn't the case, it would be incredibly stressful to work from home. And so we, first of all, can shift our thinking away from remote work being work from home. Let's think about it as work from anywhere. And yeah, if there are options outside of the home, those are going to be really important for a lot of people that have to share their home with maybe another person who's working full time, or children. So building a co-working space is a great step in supporting that community.
Absolutely. We've got a lot of good questions coming in. The next one is, employers are struggling with keeping their remote workers feeling connected to each other and the company. Do you have any strategies to address this?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that we encounter very regularly in our consulting practice. That's one of the biggest concerns. We're going to lose our culture. We're going to lose our connectedness. And from the workforce in general, when we have focus groups and we're hearing from them, I feel disconnected. I feel isolated. So there's 2 things that I would say. First off is that everyone feels isolated and disconnected right now. And it's not so much a byproduct of remote work as it is a byproduct of trying to remote work through a pandemic. So when there's opportunity to, 1 day a week to be in the office and reconnect, those things are going to go a long way to continue to establish that culture and connectedness that we just don't have the privilege of or the luxury of right now. But there are very many things that you can do, even though it's virtual and it's not the same. If we can be very intentional about designing events and designing programs that are geared towards enhancing culture and engagement within our teams, yes, that's something that absolutely can be done. We could talk about that for a very long time here, and we don't have the time to. But please do follow up and reach out to me or my team, as that's something that we deal with very, very regular.
Thank you. So you mentioned employer preparation. What kinds of resources are states providing for employer preparation? What do those supports look like? And are they locally based or statewide resources?
Good. So I mentioned the Rural Online Initiative in the state of Utah. Part of that program was to provide leadership and management training to where people that are going to be now managing their team remotely would have a chance to get some free training that was sponsored by the bill through Utah. But that's something that each state is going to have to look at individually. There are some training resources state by state. I live in Georgia. We do have some here. But whether that is a resource that is available through your state, or if that's a resource that you're going to pursue privately, I strongly recommend to not just throw the managers into the arena and say good luck, sink or swim. It's a different experience, and we need to prepare for that.
Thank you. What does the role of actual diversity and inclusion in a community have on attracting talent?
That's a great question. So Tulsa was a good example to where they were very intentional about the applications that they selected, because they wanted to attract a diverse background, a diverse number of candidates coming into this program, because they knew that if they could do that, then their future goals of attracting more diversity into the community would be supported. And so I guess we say that like attracts like, and generally if we make an effort to appeal to a more diverse crowd, we'll attract a more diverse crowd. So whether we incentivize that or we gear our marketing towards that, those are important things. Absolutely.
Great. Well, that's all for questions, Lance. Thank you so much for being here today. And we'll be emailing out this session to all of our attendees, so anyone who wasn't able to watch it can watch it afterwards. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. My pleasure.